I'm Clint Hodges. I'm an alcoholic. I've heard some bad taste Easter stories in my life, Ted, but you have hit a new low tonight, no question. When I came in the room, I saw that camel over there, and my first thought was that it was a sheep. And I thought, my God, Clancy's old girlfriend from Butte, Montana. I'm delighted to be here at the 29th Annual Conference. I know that I'm just filler until next year when Clancy gets here. I feel like John the Baptist tonight. But I am glad to be here, and I was delighted to hear Carol talk. I had a chance to talk to Carol and Ernie, these two delightful people, during dinner, and they have been, it's something that, being from California, some of the things here are unusual for me. Like you can take a deep breath and you don't even feel it here. By God, out there, we know when we're taking a deep breath. I'll tell you that. And Carol and Ernie have been married for 29 years. That doesn't happen in California. They met on a blind date, and they went out a few times, and Ernie was just marginally interested, and then Carol's great uncle died and left her a lot of money. And they got married right after that. Although I must say, in Ernie's defense, I don't think it mattered at all to him. I think he would have married her no matter who died and left her all that money. Wayne met me at the airport. It's kind of funny. We always hook up, and we did after a few. I didn't know Wayne, and he didn't know me. And it's so funny. We always connect. It wasn't. I didn't have any clue about him. Last year, I called my office for messages, and my secretary was out, and there was a temporary secretary there, and she said, "You lead an interesting life." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, I didn't know you were going to be in Indianapolis this weekend." And I said, "Well, I am, yeah. How did you know?" And she said, "Well, there's a message here. Some guy called and said that the person that was going to pick you up at the airport would have a wooden leg, and he'd be carrying a big book." And and he had a wooden leg and was carrying a big book. And it's interesting. I love it. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I have, the last time I had a drink, the last time that I had to wipe out my mind with alcohol was the 14th of August, 1966. And it just astonishes me sometimes when I think about it that 21 and a half years has gone by since I have had a drink of alcohol. At some point along the line, I was allowed to give up my right to chemical peace of mind. And that is just astonishing to me. And so I am very, very pleased to participate in your 29th annual banquet here. I really am privileged to be with you tonight. When I got up early this morning to get on the plane in Los Angeles, and when I got in, I was tired, and so I went up to the room, and after Wayne brought me back over here, and I took a nap, and I never dream. I never really, but I guess I was thinking about speaking here tonight, and I rarely remember my dreams, but I got into some kind of a weird thing. I was standing at the edge of heaven, looking in to heaven in this dream that I had this afternoon, and I don't know, maybe somebody can tell me later what they think it all means, but it was kind of misty and everything, and I looked over here, and I saw a figure that was familiar to me, and as the figure came closer, I said, "My God, that's Bruce E. from Eau Claire." And then I noticed something rather odd, that strapped to him was this ugly, pitiful, grotesque-looking creature with wine sores all over him. And I said, my God, I was kind of getting the tour from St. Peter or somebody, and I said, my God, what happened to, isn't that Bruce from Eau Clair? Wasn't he president of the Al-Anon Club down there? Al-Anon Club? And he said, yeah. I said, well, I'm glad he's here, but what is that? Oh. And he said, well, Bruce damn near didn't make it up here. And instead of sending him down below, they let him come up here, but for 12,000 years he has to walk around strapped to that ugly thing. I went, oh, that is cold. And then from this side, I noticed a female figure, and I said, that's Sally. And sure enough, she was walking along, and there she was, and she was attached by the wrist to some ugly, grotesque thing about 9 feet tall, lumbering along there. And I said, that's Sally. What happened? Well, Sally damn near didn't make it up here. And they let her come up, but she has for 14,000 years to walk around with that, strapped to that ugly thing up here. And then coming through the mist over here, coming through, I said, there's Wayne Skeels, sure enough. And it was. And I looked again, and Wayne Skeels was walking along attached to a figure. It was Raquel Welch. I said, I don't get it. Bruce with that ugly thing, and Sally with that ugly thing, and now Wayne Skeels up here with Raquel Welch. I mean, he's a nice guy, but really, what's the meaning of that? And they said, Raquel damn near didn't make it up here. Yeah. I got to Alcoholics Anonymous because a bail bondsman brought me to AA. I don't know how you got here, but it's not elegant, but there it is. I was in Glendale, California. I'd gotten out of the Marine Corps the previous year, and when I got out of the Marine Corps, that safe cocoon was no longer there, and I was accountable for my drinking in a way that I had never been, and I lasted about a year like that. I started out living in an apartment, and I moved to a car, and I wound up living in a garage in Glendale, California in 1966 with 3 other guys. Well, it was a double garage. And I was not really doing well. I was 29 years old. I'm 51 now. I was 29 years old. I was earning a living, sort of, selling encyclopedias door to door. I had no way to stay out of the Glendale drunk tank, and I got there many, many times. And it seemed like the day started with me waking up in that nasty little room in the garage that I lived in, or waking up in the drunk tank. And you know, it's funny, the drunk tank sometimes is a little easier. It's odd. You wake up in the room. I don't know about you. I don't know what kind of rooms that male alcoholics live in Eau Clair, Wisconsin. But in Glendale, they're just nasty little 8-by-10 rooms. I've been in them drunk. I've been in them sober. I've pulled guys out of them since I met you. And they're all about the same. They all have a weird odor to them. They all have a linoleum floor that's sticky. You can kind of hear yourself walking across them. They have a little basin and a wardrobe. There's a toilet down the hall someplace. Toilet's just a rumor. You got the basin, you don't really need all that plumbing. I had a little narrow cot with a smelly mattress. There was a bulb coming out of the ceiling on a cord. And that was it. That was the way I lived in that little... I lived and died in there. And I never... There's one more thing. In the room of a male alcoholic, we don't give up our social life easily. There was a There was an old copy of Playboy magazine in there, and that was about it. Honey, I'm home, you know, one of those deals. It was a strange, strange way to live, and yet I had accepted it as ordinary. And it says in the book that we accept the most unusual and unrealistic conditions and situations as an ordinary part of life. Our thinking and our notion of what normal is becomes badly distorted. And everybody that I had loved and who had loved me along the way was gone, and there I was in my little room. And it wasn't that I hadn't had a lot of opportunity in my life. I had. I grew up in a topsy-turvy home. My dad, as Carol's, was alcoholic. He was violent, and he brought his own share of misery and uncertainty into our home. And I knew when he started to drink that he didn't want to be with me. It gives you a profound sense of unimportance when you finally get that that stuff in that bottle is more important to my dad than I was. It was, the word worthless was used here not long ago, and that kind of fit me. I was worth less than the alcohol that my father drank. I was worth less than the opportunity for him to be out someplace else. My mother was extremely religious, and I got the notion that to her I was worth less than her relationship with her God. I was worth less than her religion was more important to her than I was, and I resented that, and I resented the church that we went to 4 and 5 times a week, and I resented that hellfire and brimstone preaching that was done at the Church of the Air in Billings, Montana. I resented that mixed message that always seemed to be there, like God loves you. You're going to burn forever, of course, but God loves you. You know, there's kind of a... And that's not the way that it was. It's the way I heard it. But it was a little bit discomforting. It's like there was a mixed message about sex that was... you struggle with it. It goes kind of like this. Sex is disgusting and filthy and ugly, and you should save it for the one you really love. That doesn't cause alcoholism. It gives you something to work through after you get sober, I'll tell you that. I got baptized in the Yellowstone River one March outside of Billings, Montana. Yeah, that'll get your attention. Woo! I didn't find God. In fact, I didn't find much of anything for about 3 days. It just seemed to be... Yeah. Woo! My uncle went to China to be a missionary with the China Inland Mission, and I wondered. The women in the church seemed to make a lot of bandages for him, you know. I mean, I figured anybody that needed that many bandages didn't have a real good job. My mother had some questions for us. There were 4 of us by now. I have a twin brother and a younger brother and a younger sister, and my dad's in and out. He's gone 2 years or 3 or 4 and then back for a while, and then he's gone. But my mother was there, and she had some questions, and I never really was able to come up with any answers that I liked or that she liked. And the questions were so compelling. She would say, "What will you do when you meet your Maker?" Who knew? Have you found God yet? Well, I don't want to find God. I understand he's annoyed with me, and why, you know. Here's one. Where will you spend eternity? I knew where. I noticed a couple of years ago there's nothing about a day at a time in all of that, you know. It's just, But I never knew how to answer those questions. I don't know quite what's to become of me. I know it's not safe any place. It's not safe at home. It's not safe in church. It's not safe in school. And I couldn't wait to get away from those places and to go out and play and run and do all of that kind of stuff. I never really felt like I belonged in that. I never did. I had, not long ago, somebody was playing that song that Peggy Lee used to sing, Is That All There Is? And I know that feeling so well. That her notion is, if that's it, you might as well keep on dancing and break out the booze. You know, it's like on Christmas night after the gifts were opened up. Is that it? Is that all there is to Christmas? I mean, people have been talking about it for weeks and months, and now here we are. And is that it? I don't know why I don't get as much out of it as you do. Is that all there is to when my mother died? Why was I so flat and neutral about that? I was 14. And I decided at age, you know, it's interesting. We don't have much of a logic system when we're 6 or 7 years old, but we have a lot of emotions. And I had made a vow when I was about 7 years old that I was never going to trust my mother again. It just was in there. And from the time I was 7 until she died when I was 14, I had to pretend I didn't love her. But you know I did. I didn't know how to rescind the vow. I didn't know how to rewrite the story. I was just stuck where I was. And after she died, my dad had us then, and he dragged us all over the place, and I wound up going to high school in Morocco. And one night when I was 16 years old, after a football game, I had my first drink. It was vodka and orange juice, and I remember very clearly that drink and what it did for me. I can remember so clearly that there was a marvelous feeling associated with alcohol. I loved it. I don't remember my first taco, but I remember, you know, that first drink. I loved it. Because when you haven't had any peace of mind, and here's peace of mind, the fact that it's chemical peace of mind is okay. And I really loved it. And from the time I was 16, this was at a party after a football game in high school. And when the party was over, I was 29. And when the party was over, the party was over. It was over. And I despaired of ever coming out of it. In that span of time, that 13 years, I of course, finished high school. I got a college education. I went to dental school for a couple of years, but my drinking was so bad by that time I could not stay. My drinking was so bad by that time that the simplest task of using any kind of instrument with my hands was completely beyond me. I just had to shake so much. And by this time I'd found Dexamyl and Dexedrine, which gives you a real quiver. And we had patients in the clinic the second year of dental school. They went up there in Portland to have their mouths worked on, and the care was very good, and the price was right. And in trying to perform procedures on those people, I I knew I was in the wrong place. I knew. They don't like to hear you say whoops when you're in, you know. Makes them nervous. Instruments all over the floor. And they told me to leave at the end of the second year. And that summer in Portland, outside of the post office, the sign said, "The Marine Corps builds men." I hope so, boy. My dad used to say, "When are you going to be a man?" I don't know. I don't think I'm going to make it. You know, I really didn't. You look in the mirror, and what looks back, who are you? Who are you? And I knew there was something wrong. I really did know there was something wrong. And I thought the Marine Corps might fix it. And I went back to Quantico, Virginia, and I went through their officer candidate program, and I got a commission. And I spent those next 3 years on active duty. Seems like highlights of it were standing in front of somebody's desk trying to explain why I drank so much. And the 3 years ended, and I'm out with an honorable discharge by the skin of my teeth. And I moved to Glendale because I knew a lady in Glendale. And I had accumulated, by this time, a lot of scar tissue. And most of it, it's funny, I had been to jail by the time I came to you many times. But the things that weighed so much, the things that I carried around that were so heavy, were things that will never be on a police blotter. They're little nickel and dime compromises. I had children, and I had been married, and the wives had left and taken the children. I had no way to make it in the world. And the things I felt so badly about were the memory of the look in the eyes of my kids. The demanding an explanation of myself for why I told the lies that I did. Why, when I knew I couldn't start to drink, I started to drink. Always with the notion I'll have two and then quit. And it never seemed to. I woke up in the drunk tank regularly. And in those days, oddly enough, I wanted your badge number. I was, I wanted jury trial. I want justice. Clancy told me years later, he said, "You know what, you would have been better off, justice, you had about all the justice you could stand. You might have gone for mercy, but not justice." And it was always like that. It was always so. When I got to AA, I got sober in Glendale, and I was so braced for the fact that you were going to say, "Are you an alcoholic?" And I knew I was not an alcoholic. I'm too young to be an alcoholic. I know what an alcoholic is. He's the guy in the end of the bar. He's the guy in the next cell. It isn't me. I draw the line, and on that side of the line is alcoholism. And then I cross the line that I've drawn. And then I draw another line, redefining it. Well, because I had a car someplace. It's an interesting way we live. The engine seized one day. I was saving up for an oil change, and it just, Do you ever get a half a haircut? You're sitting in there in the barber shop, and you decide to squander a few bucks on a haircut, and you get about halfway through it, and it's sort of like, "Hey, I got to go. Guys, I'll be done in a few minutes. I got to go now." Well, let me just even it up at least a little bit. "I'll be back tomorrow. Let's do it tomorrow." And you walk out of there like this, lopsided. One morning I got arrested at 10 a.m. for drunk driving. Couldn't believe it. I'd been drinking since 6 because I didn't feel good, and I knew they were giving me beer without any alcohol in it because it wasn't helping. I don't know if you're ever had that experience. I'm sure you have. It's just so frightening when the last friend on earth is gone. And I left that bar that morning to go get something else to drink, and I got in my car, and it was about 2 blocks later. The light was red, and I stopped, and the light turned green, and amber, red, green, amber. I was resting. The guy right behind me was in a squad car. So he gets me out of the car. And he wants me to touch my nose and do all of that. And then he said, "You're under arrest." I just was so surprised. I guess I thought they should give me a commemorative stamp for finding my nose, you know. And a few weeks later, I'm sitting in a lawyer's office reading the police report, and the guy said, "I discontinued the field sobriety test because the suspect was injuring himself." And I want a jury trial, right? Reality was not my constant companion in those days, I'll tell you. I woke up in the room. Well, you know, waking up in the room is worse than then waking up in jail. When you wake up in jail, you need a drink. But as soon as you figure out where you're going to be for the day, you don't need to drink quite as much. But you wake up in the room, man, you need a drink, and it won't let you go. In jail, it gives you, there's something about getting used to jail that surprised me. That's amazing. The first time I went, I'll never be back here. It was so humiliating. And I went back regularly, and I got used to it. You wake up in jail, and you know what the rules are. You know, it gives real stability to your day. Not going to get arrested. But in the garage, you wake up in there, and it's just you churn and you churn and you churn, and all of the nickel and dime compromises go through my mind, and I just can't stand it. I woke up under the bed one morning. It was about, I don't know what time it was, but there was just enough light coming under the door that I could see that rat over in the corner. And he was a big one. I'm propped up on one elbow, and the rat and I are watching one another. You know, I had a rich imagination in those days, as we do, and I knew that rat would come after me and take a piece of my face out. I just was, and I would black out and come back, and the rat would be there looking at me, and I would, it seemed like it went on forever. It doesn't, but those 4 a.m.s of our lives are interminable. And then I came around again, and there was enough light coming in a window, that first light of dawn, and I looked again, and in some magic fashion, that rat had turned into a pair of socks over there. That's how cool I was. I got held hostage by a pair of socks all night. That's alcoholism, is what that is. I'm certain that there are some new people here tonight, and I welcome you to Alcoholics Anonymous. I welcome you to AA. Alcoholism is not the dramatic stuff. It isn't even going to jail. It's just knowing with everything in me that that pair of socks was a rat. It's standing on a curb in the middle of Glendale, afraid to step into the street because a truck would get me and drag me for blocks. It's being afraid to step in the shower because I would fall and go through that glass door. It's just that, it's knowing that there is a group just outside the door whispering about me and yanking that door open and nobody's there. It's that vision of things just disappearing out of your line of vision. It's having a radio that you cannot turn off. I heard a guy from Riverside one night say he took his radio out to the laundry tubs to drown the damn thing, and I Oh, he had one of those radios too. I heard a woman talk about putting quarters in a parking meter because she thought it would pay off. And down the street, pulling a parking meter, just attacking it, because it was a radio now, broadcasting every filthy thing she'd ever done. It's alcoholism. And I'm not an alcoholic. And you didn't ever ask me if I was. That bail bondsman put me in his car on a hot Wednesday in Glendale in 1966, and we drove across town, and we went into a parking lot and up the outside metal steps to the second floor of a building over a laundry. And in this room, in the back, were people, maybe 12 or 13 of you, sitting around a table. And I was told to sit down. I didn't know you existed. And nothing in my life has been the same since that time. It wasn't the last time I had a drink. But I knew from that point on that I had a choice. And you didn't ask me if I was alcoholic. You said, are you powerless over alcohol? Interesting way to phrase it. It's the way the first step phrases it. Well, I don't know. What do you mean? Well, does powerlessness and alcohol come together in your life? And you know what? When I drink, they say, put your hands behind your back. That's powerless. Get in the car. Get in the cell. Stand up straight and face the camera. That's powerless. They take your hand and say, just relax, we'll do it. And roll it over because you can't quite get the hang of the fingerprinting process. It's powerless. And powerlessness and alcohol come together in my life. And the battle was just about over now. I went out once more. And I got back to Glendale AA on the 14th of August, 1966. And every year since then, I've called that bail bondsman to thank him, to thank that Eskimo in my life for the extraordinary thing he did for me, to bring me to you. And it's kind of funny, because he's as amazed by this as I am. I call him up and I say, Don, it's Clint Hodges. And there's just that moment of silence. And then he says, yeah, Clint, where are you? And I say, it's all right, I'm great. I just called to thank you. It's been another year. It's been another year. See, that's God's grace in my life. When you've been really lost, you never get over the wonder of being found again. And so if you're new here tonight, this is Eau Clair's Lost and Found Department. Welcome. Glad you're here if you're new. You see, on the 14th of August, 1966, I was a drunk. And on the 15th of August, I was not a drunk, and I haven't been a drunk since that time, and that is pretty fast sledding for a guy like me. They say this program works slowly, but that is moving right along. And it's interesting because so many times we talk about whether we deserve things or not, and that doesn't seem to have much to do with it. It isn't that I don't deserve to be sober. It just doesn't seem to matter much. I didn't deserve any more or less on the 15th than I did on the 14th. It was all about the same. I didn't believe in God on the 15th. I didn't love you on the 15th. I didn't think I was home on the 15th. I just knew I had a choice. Because you had told me on the 14th, you never have to take another drink again a day at a time as long as you live if you don't want to. And somehow I knew that you knew. I went up to a guy when I was 5 days sober, and I said, how do you get to sleep at night if you don't drink? Big question for me. Because of all that stuff that goes through my mind. What Chuck C. used to call a grand central head was mine. And he said, do you really want to get to sleep? And I said, yeah. And he said, where do you live? And I said, I live down the street. I didn't tell him about the garage. I thought I'm too cool. I'm too cool. I'm standing there in Levi's and a T-shirt and tennis shoes and one sock, and I'm too cool to tell him about the garage. And he says, do you really want to get to sleep tonight? And I said, yeah. You're sure? Now I'm sorry I asked. I know it's going to be a big deal with this guy. This guy in AA that looks so kind. You know, the kindest ones are liable to tell you the truth. You got to be real careful around here. He said, do you live alone? And I said, yeah. He said, all right, I'll tell you, just for openers tonight, when you get home, make your bed. And I thought, oh, really? Housekeeping hints from this old fool? He said, I'm not kidding you. Put clean sheets on your bed. And I wondered how he knew about those sheets. I mean, the psychiatrist never mentioned the sheets. And then he said, after you get into bed, say a prayer to yourself. Oh, I don't think so. He even told me the prayer, if God be for us, who can be against us? Well, that's St. Paul. I never did like St. Paul. And I had prayed. We grew up with that. My mother made us pray. Now I lay me down to sleep. Doesn't work. You get to that part about if I should die before I wake, that'll keep you awake a while, just working. And I went home that night half disgusted with this bird. I went back to my room, but you know what? There was one thing I could not get out of my mind. He knew about those sheets. The guy had instant credibility with me. And I found some sheets someplace and made that bed. And I got into the bed and I said that stupid prayer he told me to say. And the next thing I knew, it was 7 o'clock the next morning, and I hadn't slept like that in a year. And I probably figured it's about time I got a night's sleep. You know, I doubt there was much gratitude in it. But it was a turning point. I turned a little corner. I heard an interesting thing a couple of weeks ago. Somebody was talking about watching a regatta, a sailboat race, and how if you're looking down on those sailboats when that gun that starts the race goes off, it doesn't look like much is happening. I mean, you know, they just kind of slowly come about. If you're on deck, there's a lot going on. But just watching it from a distance, and I'm sure that somebody watching me would not have known that there was anything going on. It was just kind of business as usual, except that I had a place to go. Now, I found out I felt better at 10 o'clock than I did at 8:30 if I went to a meeting. On more than one occasion, on the way to the meeting, I would say, I'm going to stop for a drink afterwards. And somehow at 10 o'clock, I didn't have to do that. I gave up the encyclopedias and got another job selling imprinted ballpoint pens. The days go by a day at a time. It's interesting. I hated that job. There wasn't much in it for me. I borrowed a car and just drove around doing that. And always at the end of the day, I had the Alano Club in Glendale to go to. And I would get up to the top of those stairs, and Barbara, who ran the place, would sometimes say, Clint, Eddie had to leave. He ordered a hamburger. He paid for it. He's gone. Can you eat it? Yeah. I mean, she did it in such a way that I could accept it. It's funny, you stick around here. The first time I ever really remember trusting anybody in AA was when I was 9 months sober. They'd given me a job on the Monday night meeting. I was the one that got to set up the chairs. And I had the straightest rows of chairs in town. Sometimes they even let me bring the cookies. And it made me feel like I had a right to take up a chair in the meeting when I did that. And so I liked to do it. And one night some giants came in. One of them had 8 years of sobriety. And I'd seen these men and women around the club laughing with one another and having a good time and talking to themselves and seeming to be joyous and having fun. And on this particular night they were going down to a mental hospital to put on a meeting, part of the institutional committee in L.A., and they asked me if I wanted to go with them. You bet. I went and checked in with the secretary of the meeting, and he said I could go. You can't get it any higher authority than the secretary of the meeting, you know. And we went down the stairs and into the parking lot, and Bill Christian's old Chrysler was there, and we got in that car. I sat in the middle in the back seat, and we drove for 25 minutes down the freeway, and I listened to these people with 8 and 10 and 12 years of sobriety laughing and talking and being with one another, these men and women that seemed so wonderful. And they had included me, and I was grateful, and we pulled into the parking lot, and they said the mental hospital is there, and the meeting is going to be in the day room over there, and we started to get out of the car, and it hit me. I thought, it just makes your knees buckle when I knew 6 of us were going in that nut ward. 5 of them were coming back out of it. My next thought was, I can outrun every one of these old fools. And my next thought was, you know, and this is the incredible thought, if they think I belong in there, maybe I do. And I sat in that meeting for an hour, and at the end of the hour, they had brought the patients down, an orderly had brought them down, and we put on a meeting. I just sat there, looking at them in their paper slippers, wondering how I'd look in paper slippers. And at the end of the meeting, we stood up and said the Lord's Prayer, and the orderly took them back upstairs, and the 6 of us walked out, and we got in Bill Christian's old car, and I sat in the back seat in the middle, and we went back to Glendale, and I slept in my own bed that night, and I slept, a little astonished that I had trusted you. And I turned a corner. I got a job with a salary attached to it at the end of my first year of sobriety, selling dictating equipment for Edison. I worked at that second year, and by the end of the second year, I had gone out to Santa Monica to see my son. He and his mother lived out there, and I got to visit him now. And after I would visit him, it would be about 7:30 or 8 o'clock, and I would leave, and I would stop at a meeting in the West Los Angeles area more often than not and be at that meeting. And there I met a guy that was to have a profound effect on me, a guy named Clancy. I mean, in those days, in 1968, there was a cadre of people around him that were very intense, maybe 20 people. And he was very much at the center of things. And I watched him. There was something oddly attractive about what was going on with those people, because it was clear that they loved one another, and it was clear that they loved being sober, and it was clear that they were not only talking about the 12 steps of the program of AA, but they were taking them. And I sidled up to them and hung out with them a little bit, and eventually moved over there, eventually asked Clancy to be my sponsor. Took a 4th and a 5th step. Had a terrible problem paying child support. I remember I just disliked that woman so much. I thought that, in those days I didn't have a checking account. I wasn't to have a checking account until I was 5 years sober. It's an interesting way to budget, I'll tell you that. I didn't have any credit cards and I didn't have a checking account. And it gave you always know when to stop spending at the end of, during the month, you know. If you reach in your pocket and there's nothing there, you say, well, that's it till payday. Hope we got plenty of macaroni and cheese someplace. But it was okay. It worked fine. I learned to live within my income. And I was afraid because I'd gone to jail when I was 5 months sober for checks I'd written while I was drinking. And so I wasn't really great at managing that kind of thing. And I'd gotten put on 3 years probation and had to pay a fine. And slowly I had taken care of the residue of the past. And the paying of child support was a struggle for me. And I went to Clancy one day and I said, I hate her. And he said, if you want to change it, I can show you how. I said, how? He said, do you want to change how you feel about her, or do you want to hate her? I said, I want to change. He said, if you want to change how you feel about somebody, you got to change how you treat them. He's a behaviorist. He's one of those people that knows that we can change not our emotions. We can't change how we feel by acting on it. We can't really will ourselves to feel different. But we can change how we feel and how we think if we change how we act. And he said, you want to change how you feel? Pay the child support. Pay it up front, on time, every time. And I started to argue with him about it because I wanted to wait till I was ready to do it. I wanted to hang on to the game. The game is to send it 3 weeks late. The game is to go over there and give it to her in person and tell her how to spend it. The game is to use it as a bludgeon. And he took my game away when he said, if you don't do it, you can get yourself another sponsor. And I began to do it. I began to send that money, and I immediately began to feel better. Every payday, she got a money order from me in the mail. I never took it over in person. It just worked better that way. And we didn't discuss it. I remember a few months later, after I'd been paying child support for a while, I was driving down the freeway and I had a guy with me that I sponsored, and he was screaming about his ex-wife and what a bad mother she was. And it occurred to me in the middle of that tirade, my God, that ex-wife of mine is a stinker and I don't like her very well, but she is a wonderful mother. And it was the first positive thought I'd had about her in years. And the only thing that had changed was I was paying child support. And I got it I was calming down with it. And that next December, it was time again, and I sent the money a little early because it was Christmas, and she said she needed it. I took it over in person, as a matter of fact, and handed it to her. And when I left that apartment that night and walked down those stairs in Santa Monica, the odd feeling of being a man was there. I'd never had it before. I knew I was growing. There's not enough booze in the state to buy me that feeling if I don't have it. And I got another job selling a little computer for lit, and then I got another job selling carpets, and I didn't much like the carpet business. And I'm 4 years sober and then 5 years sober, and it was fine. I was earning a living staying within that, and somebody came up to me one day on Saturday at Clancy's place. There's about 200 people that get together every Saturday and play volleyball and softball at his place. Every Saturday. We all had lunch there, and one of these guys came sliding up to me one time. I didn't know him very well. I'd seen him around AA. He'd been sober a long time. And he said, you ought to go to law school. I said, you're kidding me. He said, no, you've been bitching and moaning about your job, and it's time for you to do something. And he made me promise him that I would look into it. And I did. And I found out you can go at night. I got to work during the day. But it takes 4 years at night. Do you know how old I'll be in 4 years if I go to law school? How old will you be in 4 years if you don't go to law school? Well, carry the one. And the 4 years go by. I had a low grade on an evidence examination in my senior year, and it was just at a time when I was very tired and I was very anxious, and I knew that I had just wasted 3.5 years in school. I'd worked during the day, I'd gone to school at night, I'd gone to AA, I had kept my sobriety #1 priority in my life, and I'm now 9 years sober, and it's all over with because I got a bad grade in an evidence examination. And on the way home I stopped at Clancy's. I never did that unannounced. I always called him. But this particular night and he happened to be home, which was not usual. And I remember sitting in his living room. I remember how he held me because I cried. I knew it was all over. My perception of it was I couldn't make it and never would. And within about 10 minutes, he had me laughing, and we were hooping and hollering, and he comforted me and sent me out the door, and I went home and was able to study that night. And in the spring of 1975 at Whittier College, in the amphitheater during graduation exercises, of course he was there, and so were many of the AAs in that area. And then I had to begin to get ready for the California State Bar examination, which is a rather colorful test. 3 days, writing everything you even suspected about the law. Tough exam. But for me, getting ready to take it was interesting because I took off from my job for 3 months and studied every day. But the thing that really kind of got me down was that they have an application that you have to fill out to take that bar examination. And the application wants to know who I am. Like, list all of your residence addresses since you were 16 years old. I had a study buddy, he had 2 addresses. I had columns of addresses. A month here, 3 weeks there. The Pontiac, you know, that kind of thing. Have you ever been convicted of anything other than a minor traffic violation? And they leave 3 little lines there. I call up this step Nazi sponsor of mine, and I say, you know, I don't want to answer this question about the convictions. And he said, why? And I said, well, there's one of them that never got on the police blotter. There was an arrest one night when I high-centered my car in the rock garden, and somehow or other it isn't there on the rap sheet, because I had seen the rap sheet, and I don't want to put it down. And he said, I get it. They're just asking you for the ones you want to put down there? I said, well, no. He said, you don't have to put it down. I was so braced for one of these harangues about the steps. And he said, you don't have to put it down. I said, huh? He said, you won't pass the bar examination if you don't. I said, what does that mean? Is that some sort of Zen retribution or something? He said, no, it's real simple. See, if you don't put it all down there, they may let you take the bar examination, but you'll know back in your mind someplace that you're going to get caught. And so you won't really get ready for it because you figure even if you passed it, they won't give you a ticket. On the other hand, if you put it all down there, every bit of it, everything, they may not let you take the exam. But if they do, you can give it the best shot you got because you won't have to worry about what they'll find out about that you haven't told them. And I knew he was right. And so I put it all down there. Everything. Bundled it up with twine and sent it up there. And they let me take the test. It had been 9 years by this time. And I took that test. For 3 days, I sat down in the Coliseum, in the Convention Center in Los Angeles with 3,000 other men and women at tables like these and scribbled everything I even suspected. And at the end of the third day, I put my pencil down and I got up and I went to an AA meeting. And then I waited 4 months to find out if I'd passed. I didn't do that a day at a time. And on Thanksgiving Eve in 1975, I got a call from a guy that I sponsored that worked at a local newspaper, and he said, "We got the list, and your name is on that list." I said, "What list? What do you have there?" And I had passed the bar examination. I remember that Thanksgiving morning at breakfast, I cried. There's no way for me to do that the first time. That's a tough test. And by that afternoon, I was thinking, they really ought to tighten it up to keep those dumb bastards out of that arrogance comes back so fast. And I love it. I've been doing it since that time, and I love it. It captures me. I love it. I love the courtroom. There's nothing like a good roll in the mud in the courtroom. Just a... I happen to be one of those people that believes that you can have anything that you can see for yourself in sobriety. I don't think we're restricted at all. I simply do not. And don't be reasonable about what you want. It's His good pleasure to give us the kingdom. And He has, if we but knew it. A couple of years went by, and I was back over in Glendale in that court. I was up on the second floor, and they called the case, and I answered ready for the defendant. And we worked till noon, and then the thing was done, and I went down to the parking lot, and I went down that corridor where the municipal court rooms were. And somebody opened a door and came out in the hall, and I looked in the courtroom, and there was Judge Ken White on the bench, the one that had sentenced me so many times. And there was some guy standing in front of him, my replacement. And you get a sense, there's no way for me to go from being the defendant in municipal court up one flight, answering ready for the defendant in superior court. There's just no way. That's light years away. But it's here that those kinds of things happen. And so if you're new here, the thing that's going to happen to you is beyond your wildest dreams. Don't be reasonable about what you think is available to you. Because your reason on it will be no better than mine. You won't have a sense of living in any joyous way. If you're new here, you're going to be told to go to lots of meetings and to work the steps. And for just a minute or two, I want to suggest why you might want to do that. In the meeting, something extraordinary happens. Something usually happens that gets us in the room, here with one another, where reality is, right now. Somebody will say something that brings us here in the room, not up here. See, most of the time, I spend it up here in my head, fretting about tomorrow and yesterday. But those are just pictures that don't have much to do with reality. My reality is right here with you, this podium and the people and the chairs and the coffee cups. It isn't up here where I fuss and fret so much. I heard a guy one night that got me into the room because he said something so simple that it knocked me out. He said, and he was talking about step 11, and he said there is only one time that any of us can have a conscious contact with God. And I thought he was going to say, as I sat there listening to him, that we could do that if we were loving somebody or serving somebody or at a meeting or on a 12-step call. And he said none of those things. He said the only time that any of us can have a conscious contact with God is right now. Well, why the avoidance of now? Because there's no problems here. I want to get back up here where I got problems. I love my problems. The most satisfying thing about a discussion meeting, I can get my problems out here and talk about them. Ooh, they're mine. Who would I be without my problems? Give me that camera. I want to take some snapshots of my problems. My sponsor says, hey, I got a solution for you. Not yet. Not yet. I'm not quite done with my problem. Love my problem. But it's great to be here with you. This is where we have that extraordinary community that we never had, that we had given up long ago. A sense of community. And it's where we're loved. It's where we get it that we love other people. How many times have you been in a meeting and seen some guy get up to take a 60-day chip or a 90-day chip, and you have tears in your eyes because the guy can't stay sober, and you know that, and I know that, and he's sober. And you're right there with him. And you don't want a thing out of it. And there's a richness in it and a joy in it because we're right here with one another. So if you go to lots of meetings, you get a chance to learn to kind of be here in the room where it's safe. And if you work those steps, some weird things happen. Because there's so much noise going on up here, we despair of ever being in the room because we constantly come up here to watch the parade of horribles go by. And if you know, what if there was a way you could take all that stuff and write it down on a piece of paper? All those ugly thoughts and funny thoughts and crazy thoughts and noble thoughts and nasty thoughts. That's step 4. What if there was a way? That kind of drain the swamp a little, wouldn't it? Kind of get it out here in reality. What if there was a way you could read that to somebody else? That's step 5. It airs it out. It puts it in reality where it belongs. Step 6 and 7, those steps about character defects, all that is just looking to see how I hook into the problem. Really, in fact, the fact that it isn't a problem. It's just an event in my life until I, with a character defect like greed or lust or envy or anger, get attached to it. Then it becomes a problem. Otherwise, it's just an event. I got to see how I do that and why and what I get out of it. What do I get out of it? Well, if I tell you a lie, I get a sense that maybe you respect me more. And the question is, if I could get your respect without the lie, would I drop the lie? Yeah. I'm sick of the lie. All right, here's how you do that. And we're told, you keep all your agreements. Just for openers, you keep every agreement you make with everybody and don't make agreements you can't keep. What if there was some way? Because most of us have a sense of impending doom, which is nothing more than that feeling that those people we've heard out there are going to get us. What if there was some way to make a list of those people? That's step 8. What if there was some way to go make amends to them, to mend that relationship? That's step 9. That really quiets your mind down. I can walk down any street in any city in this country and not be afraid that somebody's going to come smack me because I heard him way back there. I paid off finally that father-in-law when I owed him $14,000 when I got here. I paid him when I was 12 years sober, and it was a wonderful experience to have it done. I got to see, he wrote me a letter. It was a nice letter. It wasn't nice enough, of course, but it was a nice letter. I got so excited about it. Interesting thing, my income went up. Now I could allow myself to... It's interesting. They don't want your money. They want their own back, but they don't want your money. I got so excited, I wrote a guy in, when I was in dental school, I roomed with him, and I burned down his couch. God, he was mad. It was the last one on the list, and I wrote him a letter, and I sent him a check and said, sorry about the couch, and I told him I was sober in AA. And within a week, he had written me back a marvelous letter. God, he was thrilled that I was sober. He loved it that I was sober. He sent me the check back and said, donate it to AA. And maybe someday I will. I might. It could happen. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful life. If my mama were here tonight, she would say, what will you do when you meet your Maker? I used to think I'd tell her, well, when I meet my Maker, I'll tell him I got sober and paid the money back. But you know what? There's a better answer. There's really the priceless answer is I could say, Mama, we already met. I met him in that club in Glendale in 1966. I meet him every day. We've met, and my life is a lot better now. I've enjoyed being with you tonight. Thank you.